Picture this. It's the mid-1980s in a quiet little English village. Life is normal, predictable, until it's not. This is the story of a case that would completely change the game for forensic science. A story of terror, a really puzzling confession, and a scientific breakthrough that literally changed the world. So on the surface, the case seemed pretty straightforward, if tragic. Between 1983 and 1986, two teenage girls are murdered in the same area, in the same horrifying way. The police, they're under a ton of pressure, and then they get a confession. Seems open and shut, right? Case closed? Well, not so fast. This is exactly where the story takes a turn that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. For the very first time in history, this brand new, almost sci-fi technology was about to go head-to-head with a signed confession and totally rewrite the rulebook. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in Narborough, Leicestershire, a small, tight-knit community that's suddenly just gripped by absolute fear. Two horrific crimes, years apart, completely shattered the village's sense of safety. Everyone was left wondering who on earth could be living among them. You know, the police made this chilling connection right away. In 1983, 15-year-old Linda Mann was attacked and murdered. Then, 3 years later, it happens again to another 15-year-old, Dawn Ashworth. The method, the location, the sheer brutality, it was all so eerily similar that police were absolutely certain they were hunting for a single serial killer. So right after Dawn Ashworth's murder, the investigation zeroes in on this local 17-year-old kid, a kitchen porter named Richard Buckland. After some really intense questioning, it finally looked like he was the breakthrough the police so desperately needed. But here's where things got weird. Buckland's story was just plain puzzling. He confessed to the second murder, killing Dawn Ashworth, but he flat out denied having anything to do with the first one. The police were convinced he was just lying, but it raised a huge question. Why would you confess to one awful crime, but not the other? It just didn't add up. So while the police are scratching their heads over this bizarre confession, a quiet revolution was happening at the nearby University of Leicester. A brand new technique had just been invented, and, well, it was about to turn this entire case completely upside down. The scientist was Sir Alec Jeffreys, and his incredible invention was called DNA fingerprinting. It was this totally groundbreaking method to create a unique identity profile from a person's genetic material. Now, it had a lot of potential, but no one had ever actually used it to catch a criminal. This case, it was going to be its very first test run. So the police gave Jeffrey samples from both crime scenes and a sample from their main suspect, Richard Buckland. The results came back, and they were an absolute bombshell. The DNA from both murder scenes, a perfect match to each other, confirming it was a serial killer. But neither of those samples matched Richard Buckland, not even close. Just let that sink in for a second. A man who had confessed to murder was proven innocent by science. This was a legal earthquake. For hundreds of years, a confession was basically the ultimate piece of evidence. But on this day, science spoke louder, and an innocent man walked free. Okay, so this created a huge new problem for the police. They just freed their only suspect, which was the right thing to do, but now they had the killer's unique genetic fingerprint. The only question was, how in the world do you find one person based on a DNA profile when you have nobody to compare it to? The answer was an operation on a scale that had never, ever been seen before. To find their guy, the police decided they would just have to test, well, every man in the area. And the number of men who voluntarily came forward was staggering, over 5,000. It was the world's very first mass DNA screening. Men from 3 local villages, all between the ages of 17 and 34, were lining up to give blood and saliva samples. This became the biggest forensic dragnet in history, a high-tech search for a genetic needle in a haystack. But after months and months of painstaking work, testing thousands upon thousands of samples against the killer's profile, the result was nothing. Not a single match. The investigation just hit a total dead end. It really seemed like their genetic ghost was going to get away with it. And just when this massive, high-tech manhunt seemed like a total failure, the entire case was blown wide open by something incredibly low-tech. A simple conversation that someone happened to overhear in a local pub. So get this. A baker named Ian Kelly was heard bragging to his friends. He said he'd taken the DNA test, sure, but not for himself. He'd done it as a favor for a coworker, a guy named Colin Pitchfork, who had begged him to give a sample in his place. Someone tipped off the police, who quickly found Ian Kelly, and he confirmed the whole story. So they went and arrested the real Colin Pitchfork. And the reason a man would go to such insane lengths to avoid a simple test? It became crystal clear when they analyzed his DNA. It was a perfect match. The genetic ghost finally had a name. Now, Pitchfork's capture was the end of the manhunt, but it was really just the beginning of a revolution in the justice system. This single case didn't just solve 2 murders. It changed literally everything about how we prove guilt and innocence. I mean, the impact was just massive. It was the first time DNA profiling ever solved a murder, the first time it ever cleared an innocent person. It paved the way for courts all around the globe to accept DNA evidence. It kicked off the creation of national DNA databases, and it completely redefined the power balance between a confession and cold, hard scientific proof. And so, from this one awful tragedy in a small English village, the absolute gold standard of modern forensics was born. It's a tool that protects the innocent, exposes the guilty, and gives a voice to victims when all the other evidence has gone cold. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If this was possible way back in the 1980s with a technology that was brand new, how many other truths are still out there just waiting for the next big scientific breakthrough to finally bring them into the light?